Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. The Spanish Grand Prix is just around the corner and Mercedes using their second allocated filming day to try and get an idea of how these upgrades might actually work this upcoming weekend. Will it work out for them though? That is certainly another question mark. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'll greatly appreciate it. Really helps to the channel. Yes, the Spanish Grand Prix in just a couple of days time. Big news before that though is the fact that there will be no replacement this year to the Russian Grand Prix, of course cancelled for rather obvious reasons. Rumour had it that potentially Qatar or even a second Singapore Grand Prix could be coming in instead. They had some weird idea that they might do like two Singapore Grand Prix back to back, where they would do like one at night, one in the daytime, or something different there. They've decided not to do that, and Qatar's not going to be a thing either, so they're going to stick to 22 Grand Prix this season, which means there's not going to be the 23rd, there's not going to be the record-breaking season that it was kind of tips to be. There was talk about Turkey, and maybe other tracks could come into the mix, but no, this is going to be the calendar for the entire season. The Russian Grand Prix is gone, as we've described. Now look, there's no replacement. This does obviously have some serious implications here, right, for the teams, because there's been all this talk the past few days, understandably so, about the budget cap, and I'm sure teams are rather frustrated because with inflation and fuel costs rising and this type of stuff, it's getting rather expensive for these teams to move everything around the globe, and they're kind of, well, they're pushing the cost cap in that sense already, not just on the development front, and they've been kind of raising this concern to the to Formula 1 these last few months about how everything's rising in price, therefore they can't do things as cheaply as they would be able to. Like that 23rd race was going to be a big issue, to be honest. Now they've got rid of it, they've decided not to replace it for various reasons, probably partly due to the reasons we have just described, and that means there will only be 22. This does now potentially open up a little bit more, development budget for the teams to work some things on the latter half of the season. I'm sure they can be very happy that, and of course the team members get to have one more weekend home with their families this season, right? Because it was getting pretty packed, and there's been all this talk that they could go up to 25, 30 Grand Prix because the interest is there. Whether they will ever do that, right? I'm pretty sure right now the limit is 25. They're not allowed to go above 25, at least for now, but they've certainly been trying to push the boat out the last couple of seasons. There was going to be 23, now there's only going to be 22, and maybe F1 fans won't be too happy with this, but at the end of the day, the teams I'm sure are going to be, as that Ferrari news points out right here. One less race could have a significant impact on the budget cap for the power units, which are pushed to the max in Russia. The lesser mileage may well be crucial for actually having your three engines survive the course of the season, and of course there may be some additional resources for development that can be utilised for the second half of the season. So interesting to see how that one goes. Of course there has been some talk on budget cap the last few days, but Otto from Ferrari has a little upgrade on this, or a little update on this. If there is a concern, it's how much Red Bull are developing considering the budget cap. I hope that at some stage they shall need to stop. I fully trust the FAA to enforce it fairly, but like all new regulations, there is a competitive advantage if you can read the regulations in the proper ways. Doesn't mean there are grey areas, but the way that teams may interpret the regulations themselves could be rather interesting. I think there is the need of a big effort from the FAA to try and police it. I think that in order to do that, they'll need to reinforce the internal staff, the number of people that somehow are auditing and policing, because it is a key element, right? So they've put this kind of cost cap in place, and seemingly Ferrari that we looked at yesterday have submitted this dossier to the FIA to say, look, this is what we think the teams are spending, and we're going to keep up with this over the course of the season to make sure no team is going above and beyond. There's no indication as yet that any teams are, but they're certainly raising the concern about Red Bull, the fact that they've done a lot of upgrades so far. Can they keep that up for the rest of the season? Red Bull are probably quite happy potentially as a result of this, that they do have that kind of one less race that they have to worry about this season, and probably other teams in a rather similar boat as well. Let's talk about Red Bull then, because of course they're at the front of the pack right now. Well, not in terms of the standings, but in terms of race pace the last couple of races, most certainly. They also have talked about, okay, are they going to re-sign Perez for the next season? That seems probably, it's almost certain, I'd imagine that will be the case, but it's still, I'm not sure pen has actually been put to paper on that one quite as of yet. But of course, this weekend in Barcelona will be a rather high downforce setup, so porpoising that obviously wasn't an issue for some teams of course for Mercedes in free practice 2 is a very good example of that one, and the success they had as a result of that, at least in that practice session, that wasn't really replicated for the rest of the weekend due to changing conditions and that type of stuff. But of course, if they can have a little bit of an upgrade on where they were in Miami, then they could actually be a competitive car. If at least they can put that together for an entire weekend, which remains to be seen as a challenge. You'll see that here in a second. But of course, that was a lower downforce track that was required, longer straights, kind of a lower downforce setup. Barcelona is going to be the other way around, and therefore porpoising could well reappear where it wasn't necessarily there to such a great degree in Miami with the setups the teams were running. So Ferrari are planning upgrades to limit the bouncing, which certainly they're going to need to, right? This is kind of the idea of the track this weekend. The circuit degradation is probably going to be rather high, but of course it's always interesting to see how this circuit will play out with the new regulations, with the hope that they might be able to follow a bit closer through the chicane and this kind of final corner, which is a very aero heavy, which makes it rather difficult, at least in our previous iterations, to follow closely going into the main straight with the DRS. So I'm pretty sure a couple of DRS zones, as there usually is on the back straight and then on the kind of this straight down from 9 to 10, but it probably is a circuit that suits the Ferrari slightly better than the Red Bull based on what we've seen in the last few races. Will that work out? We'll see, because Red Bull are trying to shed weight as well, but other teams, of course, also trying to make upgrades. The key point has been the porpoising issue that Mercedes have been dealing with. They're bringing some significant new changes this weekend, and they pretty much have to work. If they don't work, the season is probably over for Mercedes. They're still hoping they can make this car a race winner by the end of the year, even if the championships are potentially out of their grasp. They're going to have to drop a fair few tenths, though, to be able to do that. They weren't. George Russell was fastest in FP2 on Friday at Miami, but when it got to race pace, they were still a second and a bit behind where the leaders of the race were in, well, of course, Max Verstappen and the Red Bull in race pace. Arguably because they thought, okay, let's just consolidate 5th and 6th in this race as much as we possibly can. Let's go for a very safe setup with a high ride height, and it will be quicker than the guys behind us, but we won't be as quick as the guys in front. Of course, they want to get there. They're going to have to take some more risk, and they're going to have to make the car a fair bit better. Now, they've been using their second filming day, so the teams both get 2 filming days. I'm pretty sure they have a couple of days, both 100 kilometers they get to run on each day, and they've been doing it at Paul Ricard in France. Rather interesting circuit to choose. Maybe because Paul Ricard does have a rather big straight that potentially they could use for, to test out whether, how the porpoising is working with the kind of new aero changes. And apparently George Russell was there behind the wheel. So they're making some serious upgrades, at least, well, they're hoping they're going to be upgrades. And apparently they could be worth in the region, at least according to Motorsport Italy, of about 0.4 of a second. Like, that might just be, of course, it does depend how much, if these upgrades work, they can reduce the ride height or whatever, because if these upgrades themselves reduce drag, and therefore, the car goes quicker by 0.4 of a second per lap, but then they can also run the car at a lower ride height, gain more downforce from the ground effect, and therefore they can gain even more time. So tough to say exactly what the implications is here. Of course, like all the simulations the Mercedes have tried to do have clearly not worked out in reality, and reconciling that difference has been one of the key points that they've kind of emphasized so far this season. A couple of pictures here of some of the changes they're deciding to make, or they're trying to make. Thought this is quite a remarkable one actually from this article, just comparing the differences in concept really between the Red Bull here on the left hand side and the Mercedes on the right. And the talk from Toto Wolff was the fact that if you look up and down the grid, their floor goes so much wider than a lot of the other cars, which I think is pretty evident, especially in this image right here, compared to where the side pods are, which of course are larger on the Red Bull, but still the floor sticks out far more. I think that may be something they're going to try and tweak. But this is how the article describes the fact that the creatively designed wing with the flaps curved upwards towards the front near the flap did not affect the performance in Miami does not mean the solution is to be thrown away. So they obviously changed their front and rear wing for Miami. They seem to work kind of for a lower downforce setup, but especially in that one particular session where apparently the conditions were right that I could actually get some quick lap times, wasn't the case for the rest of the weekends. It's more likely that it will work with the complete package. So they believe that with these kind of front and rear wing upgrades, with the rest of the package they're bringing through aero upgrades, the rest of the car floor changes, whatever exactly it's going to be, they should kind of, work together nicely. At least that is their plan in Barcelona. But of course, that is far from guaranteed. This is, of course, was also described in the article that Lewis Hamilton has obviously been struggling, potentially feeling unmotivated. But this kind of final paragraph here I thought was the most interesting. In Spain, there is an expectation of making a change with the package that should be worth around 0.4 of a second. We'll see, of course, whether that transpires in reality. Tough to say whether this is kind of what Mercedes think or whether that's kind of what Motorsport Italy have theorized it might be worth based on comparisons to where they were before and where they could potentially be with these changes. But of course, it's really tough to say, because if they can somehow solve the porpoising issue and also reduce the drag, then they can lower the ride height and potentially gain all the time back that they're currently losing, which, of course, is a big ask to gain back a second with a single, package upgrade. I'm sure if they can get half a second closer, they'll be relatively happy, because that will arguably mean if they can get half a second closer to the leaders this upcoming weekends, that there's no point abandoning this entire concept of a car, because there has been some talk about, okay, could they go back to the old concept that was used in Barcelona in pre-season testing if this one doesn't work out? But if, of course, this weekend doesn't work out for them with these changes, will they just decide to abort mission and go back to the old model? But, as I kind of said before, the only reason why you'd really do that is if you were in pressure from behind for third place in the constructors, which right now doesn't seem to be too much of a threat. So if they feel like this car's the one with a higher potential, they're probably going to stick with it. But of course, they're going to have to make some additional upgrades. Giuliano De Kessa does point out that kind of, new lower load rear wing they had in Miami was worth about 3 or 4 kilometers an hour faster. So it did work to some degree there. But the idea is that combined with the entire high load package and the kind of second power unit that they might well be bringing in, they've kind of used this filming day as a bit of a shakedown test for it. And, with any luck for them, at least it's going to work out. So we'll see how it goes. But some additional speed, some lower drag, and also some higher downforce are, I suppose, going to be the plan for Mercedes here. It's a lot to figure out. But, this weekend is going to be a key testing point for whether their season actually can take a step in the right direction. Wanted to mention this as well, because there was a big talking point actually on this just earlier today. Toto Wolff's comment on Max Verstappen describing that last year Max drove a worse car to the maximum and won the title. Now he has the fastest car, everything is easier for him. The pendulum is swinging in his favour. Now lots of people were talking about this because it seems to be Wolff admitting that last year the Mercedes was a faster car than the Red Bull. When you look at it over the season, it's very much down the middle. It's really tough to say exactly depending on different circuit differences and stuff like that. But it turns out what he was actually describing here, which is kind of what I thought when he initially said this, because I I doubt he would make an admission like that, is that now the car that Max Verstappen is currently driving, the RB18, is significantly faster than last year's car, the RB16V or whatever it was, at least compared to the competition. I think that's what he was describing here, the fact that this year's car is quicker to the competition for Red Bull than last year's car was. That's kind of what he's describing here. So the translations always get a bit murky, but I thought I'd mention that at the very least. Just to mention this as well, I wonder if this kind of story will continue. Of course, one of the big stories so far this season has been none other than George Russell, right, and Charles Leclerc, the only two drivers to have finished in the points at each of the 5 races so far, but Russell's actually finished in the top 5 at each of those races. But in every single race so far, there's been one driver at least that started P15 or below and finished in the points, which is quite something impressive. Actually, Guanyu here in Bahrain, for example, and Yuki Tsunoda both achieved that. It was actually Lewis Hamilton in Saudi Arabia that did the same thing. Arguably could have got higher than P10 given the safety car situation. Albon with that mega drive in Australia, Lance Stroll in Italy, and then, well, a few drivers actually at the Miami Grand Prix last weekend. And just to mention this, of course, going in, well, of course, Mercedes are going to need quite an upgrade if they want to make this one happen again. But it's possible that this weekend, if things really go Mercedes' way, they would certainly have to. Leclerc might have to take out Verstappen, Sainz might have to bin it in the wall, and then Perez might have to have some sort of mechanical failure if Hamilton's going to come through for the victory here. But if Hamilton does somehow manage to win this weekend in Spain, he breaks Ayrton Senna's record for the most consecutive wins at a particular circuit. Senna set this in the kind of, well, early 90s, back in Monaco, of course, and Hamilton is planning to do the same thing here in Spain, but it's going to be a tough time. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.